to you, Ben.
Thank you. Yes, it's not really fair the room is set up this way because I get the good view and you don't. But you've only got my time. I'm only going to keep you for half an hour, then you can look at the river. It's lovely. Title of today's talk, Immerse Yourself and Be Saved. I set out to take the pulse of immersive audio and interviewed a few people who worked in the field. So this was my kind of commercial orientation research, and this is a result of what I've learned. I hope I can communicate some of that to you in this short time. So three things I'm going to be talking about. First of those is before we discuss immersive audio, we need a definition. And immersive audio being a relatively new field. Should I come forward? Probably not, no. This definition is quite thorny and a little bit nebulous right now. Second thing I want to talk about is how it's actually used today. And that's both the markets it's used in, where it's actually adding value, and the workflow that entails. And lastly, we could bring immersive audio into everyday life. We could start an industry-wide concerted effort to commercialize it and bring it into the home and onto mobile devices. But the question is, should we? And I'll look into that as well. So quite a pragmatic talk today. Not much time to do a technical one. So the first thing is, what is immersive audio? Kanye West is underwater there, so that was the nearest graphic I could come up to. And I'm going to open this to the floor, right? I've got 25 minutes, so I might as well spend a couple seeing what other people have to say about what immersive audio is. Does anybody care to volunteer something? There is no wrong answer. It is a magic room.
Any takers?
It's day 3 of the conference. You're not shy anymore, but you might be a little tired.
No.
Okay, well, it's up to me then.
Go for it, Ben.
I'm the only person in this room who has any points of view. Well, the first difficult thing is that there is no one point of view. So I'm going to split it crudely into two things. Firstly, there's the academic definition of immersive. And second, there is a kind of industrial commercial definition. Now, the academic definition is complicated enough. This paper at the last AES convention is not trying to define immersive, it is citing all the other papers that try to define immersive, and it is a meta-review of those papers. We have got to that stage already. Now, one of the things about immersive is, as an adjective, it can mean that you are preoccupied by a task. So a mono audiobook might immerse you in that you are engaged in its storyline and you care about the characters and you're concentrating on it. There's a sort of multimodal sense of immersion as well. So, for example, if you are a musician, you are using all of your muscles and all of your body to try and communicate music, and you're having a sort of dialogue with the sound you are creating, and you are therefore almost literally immersed in the sound because everything you do will control it. And to a lesser extent, if you are, say, a barista at a coffee shop, you might be listening to the sound of the steam wand in the milk, and working out how near you are to pouring it and what kind of milk you're going to create. And the sound comes into that. Or if you're a wood turner, you're listening to the speed of the lathe and the sound of the tool against the work. And then again, audio is immersive because it's telling you something about what you're doing with your other senses. So it is not straightforward. Therefore, we shall go with the industrial definition, which is how Dolby and DTS sell you stuff. So the industry definition is something that I am now going to try and define. He says, pausing to read his notes. I thought you'd have something more to say about what you think immersive audio is, frankly. That's okay, I've got an extra minute. But immersive is defined from the point of view of people who are making and selling technology and experiences at the moment. That seems to be the way that the commercial world drives things. So I'm going to go with this Venn diagram here. And I'm saying multi-channel stereo, which is not an oxymoron, because I would say stereo is two or more channels where the channels are used to convey some kind of spatial content. Multi-channel, I think, would be 3 or more channels. Well, why not? I've got to say something. And this field kind of divides into 2 separate sectors. There's the surround 5.1, 7.1, Dolby AC3, Sony SDDS, all of these cinema formats where you have a center speaker and you have surround speakers, and there's a whole number of other satellite speakers in the horizontal plane. That is not immersive audio in this sense. Immersive audio is something a little bit separate that grew about 20 years ago as a tributary out of the what was then the virtual reality scientific endeavors and is now AR, so augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. Immersive audio takes some central tenets of that theory, with like a psychoacoustic inspiration, the aspect of real-time rendering of sound around somebody, the complete freedom of movement of the source within the environment, And it takes those aspects and then tries to render those through whatever it is that you happen to be playing your audio through, be it headphones or live sound loudspeakers or cinema loudspeakers or whatever. So I would say immersive audio is trying to get that experience of absolute control over what the listener is hearing and the direction it's coming from. So this typically results in a particular kind of workflow. Now, this picture is taken from the listening room at the University of Surrey, and they were involved in this S3A project along with the BBC and the University of Salford. And I think that's everybody, but they all have a lot of S's in their names. But you can see here probably about an 80-channel loudspeaker rig. And immersive experiments using things like wave field synthesis and high-order ambisonics over the last 10 or 15 years have used bewildering numbers of loudspeakers, and this, to some extent, informs a workflow, because it's no longer really, well, it may be becoming practicable again, but certainly for a long time it wasn't, to play out a 100-channel audio file with all of these speakers being driven by their own signals, and then just kind of store this 100-track audio file on a disk somewhere and play it in real time. Because that wasn't practical, other methods were found of trying to use these loudspeakers. So large numbers of sound sources, sometimes arbitrarily arranged. Well, you have that here. I think the horizontal arc is probably about 60 speakers. There is often a height component. This is a unique thing about immersive, and it's one of the key differentiators that we're now trying to add height to the sound, because with things like ambisonics we can, and there is some research to suggest that's just as important, if not more important, than having sound coming from behind the listener when it comes to a sense of envelopment. And there is now an object-based approach to production. So rather than trying to drive all of these speakers all of the time, we render a sound source that might be mono in a specific position using some kind of panning rules or some kind of ambisonic encoding rules. And then that is realized in real time, and then you're activating. You're not needing as much hard disk or network access, but you are doing a bit more computation on the fly. So that's kind of what immersive means. And this is an example of a commercially available control panel for steering immersive audio in live sound. So what you have here is the grid of loudspeakers through which you will be reproducing the signal, the mixer on which all of the sources are available. And you'll see in the little diagram there are some icons representing the sounds which you can drag around in the arc. And then, not wanting to go into the technology, there'll be some kind of panning rule that spatializes the sound within that arc. So it might be something like vector-based amplitude panning, or it might be some kind of ambisonics realizer, but some way of fading the sound between loudspeakers using some kind of matrix so it feels like it's coming from a specific point in space. And you may be able to drag the sound out of the loudspeakers, in which case some other panning law will try and apply, and maybe synthesize a plain waveform or add some reverb, or do the things that sound does when it gets far away from you and roll off the top end. So the idea is you can just sort of drag a sound where you want it. And because these tend to be mono sources in immersive audio, there will then have to be some kind of spatialization. So you may make a sort of pseudo-width control using 2 comb filters that sum to the original signal and panning them out, or something like that. But there will usually be some kind of pseudo-stereo width control. So if you start to think about the things that we need to make this work, every audio object might have, well, it's going to have a position in space. There's this sort of width control so that everything doesn't sound like a point source. There's a distance I've already talked about, and there's also animation of all of the above. So musicians will it's becoming a cliche in electronic dance music where if you have an immersive rig through which you're playing sound, you'll have this sort of a little techno pad starting at the right and going above the listener's head and moving left and swirling around a little, and this animation is important. In the live sound use, when you have systems like Timax to try and put sound in the right place where an actor is wearing basically a positional tracker, again, the animation will be important. These cues will be dynamic, so you're not just moving things to a fixed point in space, they may well be flying around a little. If you're doing some kind of binaural or VR-based realization, source directivity and orientation is important. So if I step away from the mic, which is very bad practice, I start talking to you, I'm a typical source, and if I turn my back to you, then the sound changes, and you know I've turned your back to you because I am directional. And that kind of thing is important in VR because you want things to sound at least plausible. I'm exciting the reverberant field in exactly the same way, but the direct sound is changing. and those things you can hear. Environment properties are important too, particularly the loudspeaker positions for the target room, but then again, if you're doing something in VR, the artificial reverberation is vital. It's an essential distance cue. It's also useful for disambiguating whether sound is in front of you or behind, because your ears can tune to the difference between the direction of the reverberant sound and infer some things from that. And then there's an allowance for surround recording techniques, which I will come to later, but immersive audio best suits a sort of multi-mono approach, but there may be times when you have an ambisonics mic and you just want to inject things into the field where you're recording in some kind of stereo or some kind of hyper stereo, and you want to be able to realize that along with the mono sources you're creating. I hope you're with me so far. Well, this is nice, isn't it? So there are some liminal things, which I'm not going to talk about today and may or may not be immersive depending on your definition, but probably are. And I'm just going to mention these three things. The first is higher order ambisonics. And if you know what ambisonics started out as being in the 1970s, it was a 4-channel, I'm going to make this quite crude, it was essentially a 4-channel microphone technique where you capture the 3D sound field at a fixed point in space using 4 microphone capsules. And these are then matrixed and can be reproduced. So you have width-height information, you have front-back information, and you have stereo. Higher order ambisonics has been developed as we've had the capacity to handle and process these signals in real time. So the number of channels increases as n+1 squared. So the stuff that arrived in the 70s with the Calvec sound field microphone, etc., is first-order ambisonics with 4 channels. This microphone here, this blue thing, is an Eigen mic, which is a fourth-order ambisonic microphone and has 32 capsules that then matrix into 36 channels. And that solves a very important problem in audio. And the important problem is you've just landed some grant money, and there is no microphone other than this that costs $22,000. Very important problem to solve. There is then also Auro 3D, which is a kind of fixed bed format that's matrixed onto a Blu-ray. The advantages of formats such as these is that they are distributable. So it's kind of relatively easy to master this and make sure that somebody might be able to reproduce it at some point. But it is a fixed bed system. They've now added an extra digit in the middle, so 7 means 7 channels in the horizontal plane, 4 means 4 width-height channels, and 1 is your subwoofer. So we've kind of broken the number code now. And then there's binaural, which is the 2-channel recording technique derived by placing a dummy head in a room or recording the sound that impinges on somebody's ears and then just replaying that to a user. And that's an issue I covered last year, so I'm not going to cover it this year. Is it immersive? Probably. It depends who you ask and what you're trying to sell. So how is it used today? And the spoiler is I'm going to give you the answer now. There are 2 principal markets now in which immersive audio is already making headway. And those are in live sound and in cinema. And the 2 things that these markets have in common is first, you've already got a lot of loudspeakers you can drive. And in this room alone, because we have a public address system, there are 12 of them. You're trying to create a bespoke experience, and it doesn't matter if it's expensive to do. Because in the sense of live sound or in cinema, you've only got a few rooms you need to equip. And then live sound, you're creating this bespoke experience which people have paid a lot of money for. And they kind of want to be entertained, and it doesn't matter if they're a little over-entertained and the technology is a bit ropey, as long as you're trying to do something innovative. So those are the 2 markets. And if we start to think about workflow in live sound, always a huge live console in the middle, because the real-time aspect of live sound means that if something happens, you want to have the faders within reach. So from the stage comes all the microphones, often a lot of multi-mono mics. You might have a large band or an orchestra on stage, DI boxes from things like guitars, electronic stuff, samplers, click tracks, the keyboards, all that nonsense. Lovely, lovely nonsense, right? All of it being fed into a console. And it's conceivable that, let's then start from the right-hand side. So you have these 30 loudspeaker channels, say you want to drive, and 30 is not unreasonable. In the old days, you would have had a live sound mixing desk that would have matrixed to subgroups, and then those subgroups via pan pots, and then those subgroups would go to the loudspeaker matrix and cross-fade into them. These days, because we're no longer using 2-channel stereo, you need some kind of thing to hijack that entire mechanism and render your sound in immersive. So there is this 2 or 3U box here, this rendering matrix that you buy from somebody. And that takes over what your subgroups and matrix used to do. So now you have the wonderful problem that every single direct output that you are handling at the mixing desk needs to arrive at that box and be rendered separately. So you're going to need MADI or Dante or some 64-channel or 128-channel transport mechanism. Now, I've spoken to live sound practitioners, and 64 channels is not enough for a lot of them. You will soon run out of channels, so they have to kind of create these interstitial submixes. And to quote the person I interviewed, it's a real ball ache, but that is what you do. And instead of the pan pots on the desk, of course, we have to hijack that entire system with one of those immersive audio user interfaces of the kind I described before, where you can just kind of pan sounds around. And you're going to need some kind of communication bus between the mixing desk and that pan stuff so that you can recall different songs. You've got your store and recall, you've got your movements integrated via some other system. And it gets quite complex. So I'm going to just focus on that rendering matrix at the moment and just talk about the sort of readiness where we are. So the two big manufacturers of live sound installation loudspeakers are D&B and L Acoustics, and they both sell their own box that goes with their solution. So you buy an immersive thing from them, and this box and the software comes with it. Obviously, L Acoustics is much better because it's only 2U rather than a 3U rack, and that gives you place to put your evening standard. The Astrospatial audio system is a little different in that, just because of the politics of that company, it is designed to be used with any other loudspeakers you happen to buy. So if you're not buying off the big two suppliers, there's another system you can get. And I'm putting Klang in there as a wild card, because rather than the kind of front-of-house style live sound mixing, that's designed to be operated by your monitor mix engineers from their monitor mix desk. And if you want to spatialize your on-stage monitoring via headphones so that Mick Jagger can hear Keith Richards vomiting in the right place, then you would buy a Klang system. So there's a lot going on, and Klang is a bit of a wild card because it's designed for headphone realization, but it's a worthy mention. There's it's all part of that immersive tech. Yes, I'm talking about cinema now, and cinema is basically the same as live sound with two important exceptions. One, there's no mixing desk, but the channel count is astronomically higher. And a film sound mixer told me that more than 200 tracks in a mix is not unusual, because sometimes the director doesn't know what they want, so they'll have 2 or 3 orchestral recordings of a bit of music. And there'll be dialogue, and there might be dialogue in another language, and there's all kinds of other stuff going on, and very soon those can become monstrous. So you've got a lot more channels to deal with, but you don't have a mixing desk. What you tend to do is operate a lot more of this in the box, and DTS will sell you a software-based system, and Dolby will sell you a hardware renderer, but they generally have a bigger channel count. And the other thing that is different and special about cinema is the need for a distributable interstitial format. So DCP would be the digital cinema package, and that's a thing that is downloaded to cinemas so they can play it out of their spunky projectors. And of course, Blu-ray needs some kind of package as well. I think it's an MKV or something, but some kind. I'm not a film guy, but some kind of distributable package, and that can handle generally 16 tracks of uncompressed audio, which means there's a little bit less you can do with the format once you've packaged it up. So yes, there's kind of 3 players in the broadcast cinema market. There is Dolby with their lovely hardware, there's DTX with their lovely software, and there's MPEG who are doing their own thing, and there's some EBU standards that are kind of related to MPEG. But MPEG-H exists for 3D audio, and that's the kind of equivalent of MPEG-1 broadcasting, where it's a sort of high bandwidth streaming to people's big televisions format. And MPEG-I, currently under specification, will be the sort of mobile, like MPEG-2, the sort of mobile lower bandwidth version. But things are happening. Whether or not any hardware currently supports this is another matter, but there's certainly stuff under development. Those will be broadcasting standards. From an engineering perspective, then, the problems you have are the distribution and rendering of many audio channels. So it'll be a multiple of 64, because that's what all the formats do. Then there's metadata management. So metadata ain't what it used to be. You can't emit a sound without metadata telling you where to spatialize the things that you're sending to this box. So there's that aspect, that you need it. It's not an option anymore. The ability to edit it when you edit your tracks and move things around and splice things in and so on. So it gets a bit like MIDI, and it's not trivial, it's fairly messy. And then there's the aspect of the first frame of action, which is this very important thing to consider, that all your parameters have to be set up when you press play, otherwise it's a bit wrong. And so the first frame of action thing is something that's actually part of the Dolby specification. And anybody's specification if they want to do this, but you need to encode where you start and send that metadata as one big block to the device that's rendering it. There is no widely supported open standard for information interchange, and this is disastrous for anybody who's trying to write software or make hardware for this field. Things will probably even out over the years, but at the moment that's a bit of a problem, that as soon as you start playing, you'll get sucked into a format war or some kind of license agreement with somebody. It's hard to distribute if you don't routinely master Blu-ray discs or make computer games, because if you make computer games, you can sell these things on Steam, and if you don't, you have to be able to author a Blu-ray. From a production perspective, 2-channel stereo doesn't work anymore. It's no good. I'm going to have to hurry. I've used lots of time. Hybrid approaches are far more common than pure object audio, so you tend to have a fixed channel bed and then add a few objects to it to give you the sense of height and to give you the sense of movement. 64 channels doesn't get you very far, we've already discussed. If you're packaging into a consumer format, then you'll have 16 channels, and that will really not get you very far. And if you're trying to record in surround and capture a real room in some kind of immersive context, surround microphone techniques have scaled to include height, so ORTF became ORTF 3D, where you now have an 8 microphone arrangement. There's ESMA, which is equal segment microphone array, and there's a whole load of other things that came out of the 5.1 format migration in the early 2000s, and are now being kind of retrofitted to include with height information. Music production tends to go hyper-real. You have all this width to play with now, so it makes sense to bring the soundstage forward and put you almost like your head is on the stage. That's becoming a little bit of a cliche. It's not always pleasant to do that. If you've got an orchestral recording, you don't necessarily want to be where the conductor is, because it's quite overwhelming and it's very loud. And very often the plus and minus 30-degree stereo actually seems a little bit more easy to deal with, despite the fact that it's not quite such a spectacular impression that you get. And with drama, there are new modes of storytelling, which I'll come to later. So immersive for drama and spoken word is really a new form of entertainment medium. So shall we bring it into everyday life? I'm going to have to be quite quick here. Mr. T is going to be my mascot of immersive audio, because he won't be confined to a plane. When I was putting this talk together, that felt like a good joke. Okay, so assuming the answer is yes, I'm going to sum this up in a couple of minutes with probably the most important points of my talk. 4 challenges, right? First is distribution. Listening material must be obtainable. The closest thing we have to compare this with is surround music, which is not. So Netflix currently does a Dolby Atmos streaming version of some of its content. How you realize that at home is with a HDMI cinema processor. That's still an expensive and difficult thing to obtain. I don't think there's a way of doing that easily in the box. I might be wrong about that. There probably is now, but Netflix does it. If, however, you're trying to download something that you want to listen to, if you're a classical music fan and someone's done an immersive recording, then there are places like highresaudio.com, of which this is a screenshot. They are not ready for immersive. They're not even ready for surround. So here you are. I'm looking for a surround thing to listen to, please. Oh, certainly. What sampling rate do you want? I don't care. Just give me surround. No, sir. You have to tell me the sampling rate you want and the compression format you want it in before I'll do any searching for you. And it is an afterthought. This is one of very few sites online from which you can download surround. So if we multiply the problem up by a factor of 2 and start dealing with 16 channels, who's going to be distributing it is a very good question. You can buy Blu-ray audio, but not very easily. So this was a Blu-ray remaster of Automatic for the People by REM. I'm using it because REM are a fairly well-known band. This was a particularly critically acclaimed surround remaster. And if you look at it on Amazon, firstly, it's 80 bloody quid. And now if you want to do anything with those stems, it's not just 80 quid you pay, you want to be able to extract them as WAV files or something and do something with them, then you're probably paying another 20 or 30 quid for the software tools to do that. It comes with a whole load of shelfware. It's not even marked as a Blu-ray, it's marked as a set of CDs. It's expensive, it's difficult to find, and it's hard to use. And there is an audio site online that specializes in excellent search and an awful lot of material and is very easy to use. And if we start putting customers and sending them in that direction, then we are in trouble. And we pretty much deserve what we get right. If this is the only way that people who want to hear immersive material can hear it, then it's game over. And I'm not advocating this, I'm just saying this is where the industry is, right? People have money, they might not want to spend 100 quid on a surround version of something that costs 5 in a second-hand shop. And they're probably going to go here. I wouldn't advocate it because, obviously, I wouldn't advocate it, but it's just a fact of life now. And we probably deserve it. music industry shooting itself in the foot since 1954. We need to engage listeners with a completely new medium, so immersive is a different form. I'm going to just give you some examples of it done well very quickly. So this is a project that the BBC did. It's a 15-minute drama. And what you can do is you can start with just playing it on your laptop like you would a standard radio story. And what you can then do is, if you have any other objects around you that are capable of looking at a website and streaming audio from it, they can all be synchronized together. And you end up with this drama being played out through lots of different loudspeakers. It's set in a fighter jet in the Cold War, which is a great way to start a surround drama because you can then start to spatialize things in a meaningful way. So if you start adding channels, the drama does the same thing it did before, but the cockpit voice is in the middle, and then the voice that's responding is on one side, and then you can have some ambience from the rockets and the engine noise and so on behind you. And then as you start adding channels, suddenly you get sort of value-added content you can't hear from the conventional drama. So there's a little tape recording of what the Russians are saying as they're hearing this on their radios. And it's fantastic, but that kind of thing suits immersive very well. It's experimental, it's quite hard to do. Back in the 1970s, Andrew Sachs did a binaural drama on Radio 4 called The Revenge, with no dialogue. Again, quite experimental, but it's half an hour long, and it's very clear what's happening, despite the fact that nobody is saying a word. Extremely well done. If you can find it, somebody put it on SoundCloud, because it only occasionally pops up on the BBC. And it's very, very good. Do listen to it with headphones on. So these things happen, but if you wanted to, it wouldn't add much to the Archers, right? It has to be some kind of specially created immersive drama. The conventional radio and conventional broadcast really isn't improved much by immersive. Things have to be designed for that format. And in a similar vein, this is quite a popular drama at the moment that you can download as a podcast, starring Rami Malek, who just won the Oscar for Bohemian Rhapsody before he was famous. But what they've done with this is they've binauralized it in a very subtle and understated way, so it's not all things whizzing around. They're trying to create this sense of isolation, and there's not quite jump scares, but they're using dynamics and they're using space in a way to unsettle the listener, because it's set in a dystopian society where power has failed for a few months, and you slowly listen to things unravel from the perspective of a small town in America. So that's interesting too, but do seek these things out. And the outreach is also working. So Abbey Road ran a hackathon 2 weeks ago, which is why I mention it, where people were given access to immersive audio technology and creators could create in it. And they're trying to get the word out now that this thing should happen. Challenge 3, the tools and procedures must not be awful to use, or we won't engage creatives. Digital audio workstation should handle immersive seamlessly. I'm going to rush through this. So it should be as easy to use as a panpot. Digital audio workstation makers, at some point, once a format emerges, will have to put in a lot of work to make this as easy to use as multi-channel audio is currently. So integrated metadata management, integrated monitoring if you can stick on a pair of headphones and hear things as they're meant to be. There's danger of a format war, as I said, and there are very few immersive plugins, right? Around about 2002, when surround became a thing, we started getting surround sound plugins that worked natively in 5.1, but nothing really does, very little does that in immersive at the moment. You can't get an immersive chorus or an immersive reverb. Well, you probably can, but only at research level. Finally, the experience must scale, and this is my big bugbear, right? This is why we're not going to reach a domestic market until something happens, because consumer chicken and creator egg there is a standoff between them, as there always is with new technology, right? The consuming chicken is not going to buy expensive hardware if there's no decent software for it. The creative egg is not going to create something if it's only going to reach a couple of people because nobody else has a system. And a very quick critique of everything out there at the moment. So, Sennheiser, £2,200 soundbar, incredible piece of technology, out of the reach of most people. Dolby, £600 pair of headphones, only does Atmos. You look at his face, right? His face is saying, I don't know how I can afford next month's rent. But at least when the bailiffs come knocking, I won't be able to hear them. That is not the future. And this, unfortunately, despite the fact it's a marvelous but rather unsightly piece of engineering, is also not the future, because it's about 10 times the price it needs to be to start to reach somebody who's even interested in this format, right? You have to be a millionaire to drop $4,000 on something that might be quite fun to use for a bit. So where are we with this? I'm going to wrap up now with a minute left. Immersive audio has permeated live sound and cinema. It's already there. We couldn't stop it if we wanted to. In practice, it's often just 7.1 with a few mono objects thrown in. and that's because of the need to distribute things, that's because of the need to submix in live sound because you run out of channels. Domestic market is small, fragmented, and hard to reach. That will probably change as things like MPEG get more settled. Music tends to be hyper-real presentation with everything around you, call and response, stuff in your face, bringing the front stage format, bringing the front stage forward. Drama is about new modalities of storytelling, and immersive doesn't really add much to the stuff that's available already. Finally, we need to make things obtainable, engaging, usable, and affordable, and that was my 5-minute critique. And there might still be biscuits outside. So thank you very much. Oh yeah, finally, immersive audio does need you. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. Ben's run over a bit. We've got 1 minute. Let's take 1, maybe 2 questions if they're quick.
And also continue to exist after this half hour.
I wouldn't believe that.
Thanks. So when it comes to headphones, you've got in-ear headphones, on-ear headphones, and over-ear headphones. Yeah. Is any one of those 3 categories intrinsically better for immersive audio?
That's a good question. It depends who you are. Over-ear headphones generally seem better than closed-ear headphones because they admit the sound field, and psychologically it just feels like it's mixing better with the room around you. I personally have problems with in-ear headphones because my 2 ears aren't matched particularly well. Some people say it works wonderfully, some people just can't get them to work, and I'm in the latter category. But if in doubt, open-ear headphones, I think.
Okay, a quick one. Anyone got a really quick question? Silence around the room.
I was entirely comprehensive.
That was everything you need to know. Okay, awesome stuff. Thanks very much, Ben. Bence Kovacs.